when did you get interested in like doing wildlife biology?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Dave, and Andrew. I grew up in Zimbabwe, right? So as you said, it was a little bit of a layup when it came to wildlife. But as a kid surrounded by, African megafauna, the thing that I was always hands down the most intrigued by was the ocean. And that would be very silly, being a kid from a landlocked African country. But I was always just so enamored with it. And I still to this day remember my first real memory of the ocean, which was going to the Bazarutu archipelago in Mozambique and pulling up a little rock cod or rock hind as we call them here. And I looked at that fish and it sort of came up out of the depths, not knowing what it could be. Whereas when you fish in fresh water, you typically know what it's going to be, right? Like it's one of 5 or 6 things. But when you're fishing in the Indian Ocean, where I was, or even out here in the Pacific, as you guys know, you never know what it's going to be when you start reeling, right? And I pulled up this fish, and I still have this memory of this giant Portuguese guy, because we were in what used to be Portuguese East Africa, Mozambique, and he's like, "Oh, look at this, Forrest," and he shows me this little rock cod, and I was just, it was like at that moment, I was like, I want to know everything that's down there. And so for a landlocked kid from Zimbabwe that grew up with all these bush animals, I was always obsessed with the ocean. I was obsessed with going there as much as I could. I always told my mom when I grow up, I'm going to live in Mozambique and have sand in my house and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't do that. But I've always loved the ocean. And I got started in the bush and spent a lot of time around animals. And I don't want to take away from any of that, because I was obsessed with all of the wildlife. But I've always had this drive and desire for marine animals. And when I came to California, I was able to sort of put that to fruition, both academically and just, with the access, because it wasn't like a once a year trip to the ocean any longer. It was like it was out my door.
How many times were you in the water, while going to university? Like, you were scuba diving all the time? Were you like exploring, like all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I came over here from Zimbabwe when I was 14 years old. I finished up high school in California. And when I first came to California, this is really how my biggest connection with the ocean came. Now, I grew up pretty much bloody feral, right? I was running around barefoot. I was chasing snakes. I was catching lizards. I was getting chased by hyenas, you name it, because that's life in Zimbabwe as a farm kid. And when I came to California, I still was enamored by the ocean, but I didn't know anything about it. It was cold. It was dark. It was scary. I lived in Cayucas, guys, which is in Central California. It's not like beautiful Santa Barbara where I am.
I know Cayucas well.
Yeah. And it's cold and it's stormy and it's full of white sharks and it's kind of creepy, right? And so when I first came to the U.S., I wasn't instantly drawn to that cold, dark ocean. Instead, I was like, oh, I'm going to do the things I grew up doing and run around the wilds of Cayucas, California. But that got tame very, very quickly, right? It's all like rolling cattle lands and a few grassy hills and a couple oak trees. And after exploring that heavily, I was like, well, this is it. Like, I've caught the king snakes and the rattlesnakes. I've seen a bear. What else is there? It wasn't like being in Africa. And so one day, I still remember I was skateboarding home. I was 14 years old, and there was a garage sale. And at that garage sale, there was a absolutely useless black pole spear with 2 prongs. The third one was broken, rusted to shit, and an elastic band that was broken to crap, and a U.S. diver brand mask and snorkel, like the cheapest, crappiest, like Big 5 style brand you can get, right? And I rolled up on my skateboard as I was skating home, and I asked them how much, and I think the woman could tell I was just a poor kid, because and I'll never forget this, for $1, I purchased the mask and snorkel and the pole spear. And so $1. And that very day, I went down to the bluffs just north of Cayucas, and I hopped in board shorts because I had no wetsuit. I think I borrowed somebody's like duck feet style flippers, the kind you go boogie boarding with. So I had duck feet flippers, board shorts, and a rash guard, and the garbage U.S. diver mask and snorkel, and this crappy pole spear. And I hopped in the ocean and instantly got an ice cream headache. Fortunately, it was the summertime, but still, it's freezing. And this is getting to be a long story, but I'm like reliving it as I tell it. And I just remember I dunked my face in the water, and instantly I saw a surf perch. And then I saw a rubber lip perch. And then I saw a cabezon. And then I saw a kelpfish. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so much cooler than above land. Like, this is everything. Like, here's all the wildlife. And I felt like at any moment a white shark would come around the corner, or an elephant seal would be down there, or a harbor seal would pop up, or an orca would swim by, or whatever. Even though very few of those things are likely to happen, I just felt that same feeling that I was used to as a kid growing up in the bush. Like, anything can happen. Anything's around the next corner. And I didn't last very long because I didn't have a wetsuit, but I do remember I speared a couple little fish. I took them home. My mom cooked them up. They tasted like shit because they were all perch, but I still, that was it. I was absolutely hooked at that point. And so to answer your question, Andrew, it started in high school before I even got to college, before I moved to Santa Barbara. And at that point in time, I began spending almost every day in the water. I would finish up with, just like I did at home, really, in the bush, but I would finish up with school, and if it was pumping, I'd grab my surfboard. If it was flat, I'd grab my garbage mask and snorkel and pole spear, and I'd hop in somewhere, and I'd just spend as much time as I could in the water.
Now the important question is, do you still have the mask and pole spear?
No, I don't. I kind of wish I'd kept them because they were such junk. I'd like have them up on
Relics.
the wall or something, but
Yeah.
they really are relics. But no, I trashed them. I don't know when, a few years later, and on to bigger and better things. But I really wish I'd kept them.